Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. My name's Craig Birtelsall, and I'm extremely enthusiastic to have Peter Prickett, or as some of you may know, the bearded coach, as my guest this week. Peter is a tutor, a big advocate of the 3v3 model. Peter works with Brentford FC Community Trust and is currently coaching on the college programme. He has coached developmental centres and works with the FA as a tutor for futsal. He has written over 5 books about football, and we're looking forward to picking his brain. So how are you doing today, Peter?
Very well, thank you. Hope you're well too. Hope
Fantastic.
everyone listening's well.
Fingers crossed, right? Excellent. So, Peter, tell me a little bit about your background. What got you interested in football?
Interested in football. I guess my first real hook was the Italian '90 World Cup. I didn't have any particular interest in football before that. Um, and then I just remember everyone talking about it when I was a little kid at school, about 9 years old. I would have been at the time. Everyone was talking about it, and all the newspapers were full of it. The news was full of it, so it was just there, and it dragged me in. Um, Saying that, I've always said this. I remember watching it, but I don't really remember it particularly well. So what I have clearer memories of in terms of international football is Euro '92, which was a terribly boring football tournament.
Yes, it was.
But that's what I have clearer memories of. And then, like all the domestic stuff between 1990 and 1992, all I can really remember was the 1992 FA Cup final. And everything else sort of mushes together. And after 92, everything's clear as a bell.
Gotcha. Excellent. It's funny you say that because the 1990 World Cup was basically my first memory as well. It was David Platt scoring the goal against Belgium that got us through. So I remember it very well. I remember dressing up my teddy bear for my dad who was working on a night shift. So I have fond memories of that one too. So moving forward, obviously, as you developed your love of the game and you got into a career in the game, what was your motivation to start your career in football?
There was a recession on. Uh, it was 2007, 2008, and we had the banking crisis, and I needed to find different work. And someone said to me, "Oh, what about computing? Like, there's loads of jobs out in computing. Why don't you give that a try?" Oh, okay, so I set up a meeting, um, did some tests, and it was a company that would have helped with put me through the courses and helped me find work at the end of it. And they told me how long the course would take and how much it would cost. And I thought to myself, I don't really like computers enough to do that. And a day or two later, I was watching Soccer AM, and one of the presenters, I think it was Max Rushton, was doing his level one, FA level one. They filmed him doing that. And I thought to myself, if people had said to me, the coaching qualifications would cost as much and take as long as those computer courses, would you do it? And I was like, yes, absolutely. So that was the kickstart for me doing it, getting involved.
That's excellent. Yeah. Yeah. It's so based on the fact that you went through like your early days as a fan and then you developed the idea of like moving into coaches. Um, you built a philosophy. Tell us about what you think your philosophy is for football.
So one of the other motivations when I started was I wanted to help develop more dribblers in English football. That was what I had that in my head from the very beginning, that we don't, or we didn't have enough players who were exciting, who were exciting on the ball, express themselves, allowed to express themselves. I wanted to try and help change that. So while doing various courses and qualifications and being presented with all of these drills and practices, I, I felt disconnected from the general type of practice at the time, which was a lot of pass the ball here, player goes here, pass the ball here. You pick up books, and the books were full of A to B to C to D, and you be going, I'm lost already. I've now got to try and remember this to then show it to the players, and they've then got to try and remember it. All right, this doesn't work for me. Um, and then you do courses and you pick up bits like the old level two, the old FA level two, the technique skill game element. Actually, you look at the skill part where a lot of the time what you're doing was an overloaded type of game, and you're thinking, yeah, actually, why don't we just do this? And then the game part was generally a 4v4, 5v5, and it's a game with conditions. Well, isn't this more like it? And then you go and do the youth awards or youth modules as they were at the time, and it is more these type of games that are conditioned and creating opportunities for players to practice and giving them chances to succeed, but still chances to succeed under pressure, and also the chances to succeed might not be exactly what you were supposed to have shown them. And that's another thing I remember on my level two course. I did one of my topics that was being assessed was about attacking play and playing forward in some way. I think I had long passing, I think. But there was a brilliant goal scored with fantastic combination play from a wide area. I was like, that's amazing, brilliant goal. And the tutor said to me, well done for praising that, but did you show it to them? Did you teach them that? And I'm like, no, I didn't. And that's stuck with me. And I thought, but does it matter? Does it matter that they did something fantastic that I didn't show them? Does that mean that I didn't coach it to them? And that opens up all sorts of questions about what is coaching. And if you create an environment that allows and affords the opportunity for it to happen, I think you as a coach have done your job.
I totally agree. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's a case of it's also creating a bond with the player as well, isn't it? Because you found that moment that they did well in, and yeah, you might not have done it teaching it, but like for example, I'll tell my wife that she looks pretty today. I didn't help her get ready, but I'm still letting her know that she looks good. You know what I mean? So it's a very similar thing, and I was really interested in the beginning part when you said about your philosophy as well about. Players not dribbling as much. And I've noticed that over the years, and like you could blame it on the Guardiola model or anything along those lines, because I'm an Aston Villa fan. So I'm a big fan at the moment of Morgan Rogers. And Morgan Rogers has been basically highlighted for doing something that players have done for years, but they just kind of stopped doing it because of the kind of environment they're in now. He runs at defenders and he's being like praised for it. And it's not revolutionary. We've seen the likes of like George Best do it in the past. You know what I mean?
Well,
And
you had Jack Grealish for a long time,
100%, and I totally
dribbling
agree.
more for Villa than he does in general for City. So
That's
again,
right.
that raises the question. Yeah,
Totally.
I mean, one of the descriptions that I've tried to develop and teach players is that of the player who's dribbling with the ball acting like a magnet. So the more the player dribbles, the more it attracts opposition defenders in towards them. And just go back to that famous picture of Maradona surrounded by Belgians, whether it was immediately from a free kick and out of context, whatever, it doesn't matter. They've all been drawn towards him. So if one player draws 4 or 5 players in, how many players in that player's team are now free to receive? That's all what I try and explain to the players. Like dribbling, you're drawing the opposition in. You've then got to make a decision at some point whether you do release it to the 3 players that you created, or you actually are able to continue. That's going to be on the player. But without that intention to dribble and take players on, you're not going to draw them in. I linking to this, there's a game that I play where I use it to illustrate the point, and we'll play the games back to back. We play one game where you're not allowed to pass, but if you have scored, you unlock the ability to pass the ball. So the winning team is the first team to have everyone who can pass. I then play it the other way round. So the other way around, you score, you are then able to dribble. And the point that I always try and use it for is if you only ever do one thing, you're very easy to defend against. Whereas if defenders don't know whether you're going to pass or don't know whether you're going to dribble, it's a lot harder for them to defend you. I always do that because I want players to be unpredictable. And the same with a dribbler. If a dribbler only ever dribbles, then I think there was the whole thing with discussion when Benteke came to Liverpool with Coutinho and Liverpool. So they were split into 2 camps. Some were saying Benteke's not making any runs, and some people were saying, yeah, but Coutinho's not giving him the ball. So is that because Coutinho only ever dribbled, so Benteke gave up on making runs? Maybe.
The chicken and the egg, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And we're going to take a short break when we introduce our advert for Zencaster. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how your philosophy brought in the 3v3 model. Do you have a story to tell that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? It might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at Session Share. Zencaster makes it super easy to produce a high quality broadcast with 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes ums, ahs, you knows, and 22 other speech patterns. Zencaster makes it super easy to produce a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencaster. Welcome back, and we're here with Peter talking on Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. We were briefly talking about, Peter, your philosophy, and I'd like to see how that ties in with the books that you've released on 3v3. I know you're a big advocate of the 3v3 model. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I was just talking before the advert about dribbling and passing and essentially being decision making. And the discussion that I've had with some coaches is how do we how do we create decision making players? Well, give them decisions to make, and hopefully they'll start making decisions. Um, so, what sort of environment do we need to create that gives them decisions to make? I would suggest that where we are playing lots of unopposed practices, they're not got a huge number of decisions to make. So limit those type of practices and try and use more practices where they are opposed or semi-opposed, as in overloaded with the in possession or maybe out of possession, depends what you're working on, and give them those decisions and choices to make. So that's how I came down to 3 versus 3. So I did some maths. And I read the famous 4v4 Man United project where they looked at how many additional dribbles and passes there were in a 4 versus 4 game. And I went, well, you take 2 players out and it's 3 versus 3, they'll get even more. And I think I explain it in one of the books that I believe that you get better at making football related decisions with the ball at your feet. You will make decisions without the ball, where players need to make decisions without the ball. But generally, what we're talking about is the decisions players make with the ball at their feet. So the maximum amount of touches you're going to get is you and the ball, but then you're completely decontextualized. There's no pressure on you. There actually aren't many decisions to make. You get loads of touches, but you've got no decisions. So 1v1, you have a decision to make. But then there's parts of the game that are missing, such as passing. So then we go 2v2, scale it up, 2 versus 2, or even 2 versus 1. Great. But then there's certain things that you're not going to get. You can't get a third man run when there's only 2 players, for example. Okay, so now let's put the third player in, and suddenly the majority of the core moves of the game of football are available to you. Not all of them, and I do make that point. I've never said to anyone, only use 3 versus 3, because there's elements of the game that aren't there. But then with younger players, especially at under 8, under 9, maybe even under 10, do they need to be working on those other elements of the game? Switching play is one that always comes into it. Do we need to be working on switching play over a massive distance with those players? Do they even have the physical prowess to do that? Possibly not. So that's how we came to 3 versus 3. To me, it was the smallest number of players that allowed you to get the majority of the game related actions out, and also increase the number of 1v1 opportunities, 1v2, players getting on the ball, players making decisions, and also not disappearing from the practice. It happens far less that you have a passenger in the practice who's not involved when you're doing the 3v3 games. At least that's what I've found.
I love that because I find it similar to the way I develop a practice. Like I start with the big picture and then I work my way backwards. And I think what you've done there with the 3v3 and your expert analysis of the way you did it is the fact that you broke it down for the fundamentals that they need at that age group. So, like, for example, you say they don't need to switch to the field over 50 yards because their field isn't 50 yards. So you can take away that certain amount of players. And I love the fact that after like thinking about it, 3v3 versus a 4v4, it's naturally going to impact more individual decisions. So it's like when to shield the ball, when to dribble, when to pass. Do you know what I mean? Because taking away that extra player gives you a less passing option. So now it's going to force you to do more stuff individually. So I
Yeah.
think that's fantastic. I really
I,
do. And I really look forward to reading these books.
I have sections that I do describe as cheating slightly. So when I did some research, it was quite interesting about what people considered to be a 3v3 and what wasn't. So there was some FA research from quite a few years ago where it measured 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, 4v4s. And then I looked at it, and in the 1v1s, it registered that passing was occurring. And you're thinking, well, how's that happening? Well, you read it, and it's a 1v1, but there's also 2 bounce players on the outside.
Okay.
So is that a 1v1? So then we start to go into what I consider bending the rules and cheating slightly on the 3v3. So we've got a 3 versus 3 happening, but there's a bounce player on the outside. Is it still 3 versus 3 with 2 bounce players? Open to discussion, but you still got the same philosophy of having those 3 players.
Right.
So it then opens up more opportunities and more practices. And the other question was 3v3 plus a goalkeeper on each team. Is that 3v3 or 4v4? And that opened a vast amount of disagreement.
It's
Is your
interesting.
goalkeeper a player in the team or not? Well, I would say they are. So if you're playing a 3v3 that requires a goalkeeper, so you're using a bigger goal, that goalkeeper needs to be free to come everywhere. No reason to not play 4v4 though, as well. In that situation, if one of your players is a goalkeeper and you've got three outfield players, you're going to get those three player connections that we're talking about. But again, coming back to the age group factor, how many specialist goalkeepers are we going to have at that point? There may be some players who really want to go in goal. Okay, then let's adjust for practice to allow for that. Why don't we have a larger sort of futsal sized goal at one end or handball sized goal at one end and two small goals at the other end and play where one team has a goalkeeper and one team doesn't, if that's what the players require.
I love that. That's great, and some really good feedback there for our listeners to think about. Speaking about what to think about, if you were going to give an advice to a new coach, like what would you be giving them?
I always say just relax, just chill out. It's ultimately, if you're working with young kids, it's just fun. It should just be fun, and you you are not being judged. You're not going to lose your job because a group of 8-year olds lose a game. You're not. You're just not. And there shouldn't be that pressure because what's at stake? What is actually at stake? And yes, of course, the kids want to win. That's fine. You may need to actually calm them down a little bit. I know I certainly do at training when our game's over. Oh, we won 5-4. No, you didn't. Lads, it's okay. It doesn't really matter. I love that you are passionate about it because that means you're really trying, but you don't need to get so het up and wound up about it. It's gone in a minute. We'll just move on to the next one. And same for coaches. Don't relax about what you're doing. Even if you lose, never mind. If your session's not very good, don't worry about that either. Think about it, reflect on it, look at it as a cliche, I know, but an opportunity to improve and think about what worked and what didn't and use it for next time. Don't beat yourself up about it. Don't spend hours sitting up at night trying to plan the next practice because you're so annoyed about it. Relax, there's time. Make some changes slowly. You can even change it while you're doing it. You can even throw your session plan in the bin and just play a game. The kids will be fine with it. But relax. Every moment is not quite as important as some people make it out to be with kids' football. Just because they've spent, I don't know, a couple of minutes doing something that's maybe not exactly spot on for what they would like to be doing or what you think they should be doing, it's not the end of the world.
Great advice. That's excellent. We'll be back shortly after this brief message. Do you need fresh ideas for your football, soccer training? Then follow Session Share on YouTube and X. Our handles can be found in the show description. Session Share, for coaches, by coaches. Welcome back. I'm here with Peter. And Peter, I'm intrigued by this webinar you've got coming up on November 30th. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so fairly new thing. I ran the first webinar in August, and that was a 3v3 webinar. I've sort of decided to flip between, so I'm doing one webinar a month. The first one was 3 versus 3. The second one was based on the principles of playbook that I've written, and then we're on to this next one, which is going back to 3 versus 3, and then the one in December will be going back to principles of play. So it's going in between them. the 3v3 webinars, the first one really focused on just really explaining the content of the books and the idea behind it. This next one, because some of the feedback I got was, oh, will there be any workshops? We're going to have a little play around and try and give people an opportunity in breakout rooms to try and come up with their own 3v3 practices. And I'll try and guide them along while also just recapping those concepts and ideas behind 3v3.
Fantastic. That's great. And there's still opportunities to sign up for that webinar?
Yep, at the moment there's still spaces available. Obviously, it changes day to day, so I don't know exactly how many there'll be when this one comes out. But I have the ability to make more spaces available if people are interested as well. So if they try and book and it comes up that there's no space left, just drop me a message and I can add another space in. Not a problem.
Excellent. Sounds good. And we'll leave for our listeners as well, we'll leave the details of Peter's webinars and the books that he has that you can purchase on our description at the end of the podcast. So, Peter, on a lighter note to finish the session, to finish the podcast, what's your favorite moment in sports? Can be anything from a player, fan, coach.
So I hope I'm not breaking any illusions here, but I was asked some of the questions before coming on, and this took a little bit of thought, and it was quite difficult. I was tempted actually by Michael Jordan against the Utah Jazz when he scores the game winner. But on a football note, I've settled on the Michael Owen goal against Argentina.
Mm.
Um,
The World Cup, yeah.
1998, I was 17, Liverpool fan. I sort of felt a little bit that Michael Owen was mine because the 95-96 season, Liverpool decided to, instead of the end of season video, which they did do, but I suppose as well as that, they released a VHS every couple of months, and it had the sort of things that you get online now. Look at the academy and that sort of thing. And 95-96, Liverpool reached the FA Youth Cup final, and Michael Owen starred in that run and was scoring goals all over the place. And I was at school going, "Oh, you got to watch out for this guy. You got to watch out for this kid. I'm telling you, he's scoring goals galore." And then he did. I'm like, "Yep, see, told you, I was right." And then to score the goal that he did, the fantastic solo individual effort against a top quality side, it was a fantastic moment for everyone.
That's fantastic. And I love the fact even before you were a coach, you scouted Michael Owen. That's fantastic.
I felt like I had. I clearly hadn't, obviously, but
Yeah, I hear you. It's funny because it's the same reason the David Platt goal, like I mentioned earlier in 1990, rings a bell for me because he was a Villa player. And it's so much more pride at the time when that happens. And it was even the same this past summer when Ollie Watkins scored the winner against the Netherlands in the Euros. It means so much more because it's like your man that did it. So I 100% know where you're coming from there. Well, Peter, this is the end of the podcast. I wish I could continue. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for your insights. I found it very beneficial. I'm sure the listeners will agree. So, Peter, do you have any Twitter handles that anyone can reach out to you?
I think it was mentioned at the beginning, but at the Bearded Coach. Actually, it's at Peter Prickett, but the Bearded Coach will be there. You'll find me on Twitter. I've started a TikTok as well with that on it, which is the coaching videos. YouTube channel, there's some bits and pieces kicking around there. I really should do more on there. If you really want to go for LinkedIn, I am around, but probably best to stick to the other forms of social media if you actually want some interesting content.
That's fair enough. And I'll make sure, again, to put that in the description of our podcast. Well, that's about all we've had for this episode of Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. Thank you again, Peter, for joining us. Be sure to get in touch across all our socials to offer your opinions on everything we've discussed. You can find the social media platforms we use also in the podcast description, along with Peter's. This has been Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coaching the beautiful game.